Hi, I'm Matt Wilhelmi, and I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What's Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth. And today I am joined by Andrea Herran, owner of Focus HR, uncomplicating the people side of business. Andrea, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am great. We were just talking about this case study where these two young guys were starting a company, a service-based business for residential customers, and they had a little bit of a people issue, right? They had a problem with turnover in their sales department, and we were getting into some of the details, and you were bringing up some really interesting questions. But I think what came out of that were some different issues that you saw because you've been there, right? You've done this, you've seen this a number of different times. People might think that these issues are unique to them, but you've probably seen it in a number of different flavors, right? So I'd love to hear kind of what some of those issues are from your perspective.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. I see three main issues. And the first one is in the defining, clarifying, understanding what the role is, what the position is going to be doing like on a day-to-day basis, and, like I said to you before when we were off camera, I see this all the time. People think they're unique, and it's like, no, not quite, but there's always a solution. So, but here's what happens when you don't define what the role is and what they're doing. People don't know what's expected of them. So therefore, like when I've seen this happen, and especially in sales, okay, I'll give you medium case scenario because there's not really a good case scenario when you do this, but a medium case scenario is I had a client and they're like, they need to sell this and they should know how to do it because they already have experience doing it, which is always my favorite. They already have experience doing this, so they should just be able to pick it up. And if they're lucky, they kind of figure things out by themselves. Worst case scenario, you're dragging them along. They don't realize that they're not meeting your needs or they don't understand your needs, and they ultimately end up failing. Now, some people will say, yeah, but that's fine. I'll just get in somebody else. But here's the thing. That salesperson has been touching potential customers and therefore has been talking about your company, your reputation. So if they don't do a good job, think about who's suffering more, the person who's not doing the good job or the reputation of the company.
Yeah, that's powerful. I would hate to damage the reputation of the company, right? I mean, internally is one thing. You've got a culture issue if there's turnover, but externally, there could be an even bigger issue.
Oh, and I've seen it. I remember a particular client and they didn't realize how much it was affecting their customers until somebody had called and said, okay, why is it every time I call you, I get somebody else? Why can't I get the same person?
That the customers are paying that much attention, right?
Yep.
There's an organization that I did a project with a while ago that had a rotating door of salespeople. Not this one, totally different company, but yeah, the customers were actually complaining about it.
Well, sure, because think about it. They have conversations with somebody and they think that person is helping them, understands their issue. Then they call to talk to that person or to reach back out. And it's like, sorry, Fred's no longer here. Let me have you talk to Barney. Now they've got to start all over again. How many times
I hope they have a good system for tracking all the notes, right? Then maybe they don't. And that's even worse.
I don't know. Just think about when you do your own customer service and you call and they're like, oh, let me pass you up to somebody else. And you're like, I got to explain the situation again because nobody looks at the notes or nobody reads and stuff like that. So that, yeah, you can have a bad person in the position, but I would say, especially in sales and a customer facing position, you've got to look a little bit beyond that role and what that is saying about your organization. I have seen it not work well because they're like, well, I talked to Barney and he messed it up. So no, don't let me, I'm not talking to Wilma because you've already proven to me that you don't have good people. You're not interested in understanding what I need.
Yeah, so that's an interesting perspective from the customer's viewpoint with this issue of potential turnover. I wanted to just share something really quick because I think that it's relevant, right? We're talking about a lot of turnover, and what we haven't mentioned yet is what's near and dear to my heart, which is the money side of it, right? It's expensive. It's very expensive to hire the wrong employee. In my book, Taboo Business Questions, I actually wrote about that in a chapter on hiring. And you might have a little more, detail and can maybe affirm what I've wrote. But basically, it's that the cost of hiring the wrong employee is somewhere between 3 and 4 times what that employee's annual compensation is. Now, obviously, that varies if it's a senior executive or an entry level or a highly specialized role. I mean, at the end of the day, it's expensive, very expensive to hire the wrong person. And it's even more expensive if you've hired the right person, but you haven't given them the tools to do the job.
Yes, absolutely. The 3 to 4, I've actually seen some studies come out with 10 times.
Whoa, 10 times?
Depending on how long it takes them to get up to speed. Okay, a plug and play position is going to cost you 3 times, but if you have to do any kind of training and it takes more than a month to get them up to speed, it can go up to 5 to 10 times.
That's a lot of money. Holy cow. I would hope that would give a business owner just like a pause for like 5 minutes to like let that amount of money like weigh on their mind. That's so expensive.
It is, and they don't realize it. And sometimes, somebody will try to negotiate a salary and they get so caught up on like how much more that they want that they don't realize that for the right person, they could be saving themselves that turnover amount of 3 to 10 times, so it's that balancing act that has to be figured out.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. I know that you said you had a couple other things that you wanted to go over, right? There's some issues, and I'd love to hear about maybe that second one. We talked about the first one being, some clarification on that role. What was the second one that you were going to talk about?
Well, the second one, and all 3 issues kind of piggyback off of each other. They're not in isolation. So once you understand what you're looking for, what you need in that person, you have to have a system. And based on what you told me, there was no system. There was no consistency. It's like, okay, let's just do a couple calls and then we're going to hire somebody. Now, salespeople, and as you said before, a good salesperson is doing sales right then and there. They will tell you about how wonderful they are, how they were maybe, top in their region. They were the number 1 salesperson in their region. Okay, a little hint: ask how big the region was and how many other people were in the region. Just saying. But if you don't have a process, and one of the things, because I've seen people wing it, and winging it in sales, in my 30 plus years, I will tell you, has never worked. You may get lucky, and it's pure luck, but without a system and without consistency and without knowing what's going to happen next and who fits the mold and having a system and what's going to happen, it falls apart. I will tell you that I've had clients, that were, kind of winging it. This is the impression that they gave to the person that was coming in through the ranks. Doesn't sound like I have to do a lot of work to have this job because, I had 2 phone calls and it was done. It was super easy, no tough questions, not a deep conversation. I don't have to work hard. They're not together.
Right? You want to have a couple of steps, maybe not make it, insanely long, but there should be a vetting process so somebody feels honored to maybe get the job.
Yeah, well, and they want to feel that they've been paid attention to, that it's not just, warm body syndrome, they're breathing so they can do the job.
Yeah, so what happens if they do that wrong? Like, I guess, other than the expense, right, of trying to hire the next person, can you talk a little bit about what happens if they don't get that process right?
There's a couple things. One is people won't take the job seriously because if they didn't feel that the process was serious, professional, doesn't have to be drawn out, but it doesn't need to be professional. It has to be serious. They're going to feel like they don't have to work that hard. One. Two, you're going to look disorganized. That can turn off really good candidates because it's like, well, if they don't have it together here during this process, how together are they going to be once I'm working for them? And I've had candidates say, you know what, this is really sloppy. I'm not comfortable. I don't feel like I'll be taken care of or given, the support that I need once I'm on board because it wasn't done during the interviews or during the recruitment process. I won't even say interviews, but just during the recruitment process in general. You lose good people based on that,
Yeah, it's almost like it sets the tone, right?
Absolutely does it set the tone. It's, people forget that the recruitment process is a two-way street. It's not just the candidate trying to sell themselves to you, but you as the company need to sell yourself to the candidate. So if you don't have a process, you don't look organized, you don't look professional, what kind of message are you giving to them? And I've seen it backfire too many times.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I've heard, people that are interested in a job, they'll maybe go to that company's Facebook page, maybe they'll do some social media stalking, right? They kind of, what are they up to? Even if it's not necessarily all professional, they'll Google the owner's names and see what comes up. Hopefully it's not arrest records. Maybe it's, they're in the news about this or that or something else. And it's just, it sets a tone. You get a vibe of like, man, this person's all about themselves. Or on the other hand, this person's a giver, they're giving away their time and money and talents or whatever, if they're, maybe more, on that end of the spectrum. But it's interesting to see what people kind of research and do to kind of their homework.
Oh, absolutely. And they'll do it, and there are sites out there that rank that candidates or previous employees can go and rank the company and give them a review, anonymously. And those have pros and cons, but that's a story for another day. But reputation management,
Yeah,
on the
absolutely.
company, it's not just what your customers think, but candidates as well.
Yeah. So we got to have that consistent recruitment process, because if we don't, it kind of gets the relationship off on the wrong foot, I guess you could say. You mentioned a third issue. Can you talk a little bit about that one? I'm interested to hear what the third one is.
The third one is once you it's in the HR world, we call it onboarding. It's what that talks about is once you have your candidate and you bring them in, what does that look like? I'm not talking about new hire paperwork, because hopefully that's not paper anymore and it's electronic. But it's beyond that. It's how do you bring them into the company? How do you bring them into the job and their training and so forth? And I mentioned this before because I hear it a lot. They did this before, so they should just be able to do it again. And like in sales, well, they sold before, they should be able to sell, it's just slightly different from what they did before, but they'll figure it out. Well, some people may figure it out, some maybe not, but how can they sell something if they don't know what it is that they're selling? Truly understand what they're selling. What are the pros and cons? What are the benefits? What problems does it solve? Especially in the service-based business, it may not always be obvious what that solution looks like. So
what happens if you hire a salesperson and you don't teach them all that? Like, what do they, I would assume they're just not like effective, but have you seen something even worse than that? Like maybe I'm just kind of guessing, like maybe they make false promises unknowingly.
That's the biggest issue. It's not that they're poor, but they overpromise and underdeliver. And so many times, I wish the salespeople would stop doing that, because we can't. They told the client they're going to have all this stuff, and we can only do this much because that is what is in our wheelhouse. That is what we focus on. We don't do the 10 things that they sold. We do the first 3. And that goes back to your reputation. So, the ideal situation is under promise and over deliver. But if you get a salesperson that hasn't been brought into the company correctly, not only do they not know what they're supposed to be doing, how they're going to be judged on success, they will sell something that maybe the company can't service or provide or complete on.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's just as simple as explaining the installation process, right? And if they've never been through it and they say it'll take 2 days, but really everyone else knows it's going to take 4 days. And you're like, well, why did you tell them 2 and it's 4? Like everybody knows that, but they didn't go through the training, right? It reminds me of an acquisition that I was a part of a year or 2 ago where kind of on the other end of the spectrum, there was so much training being done. These salespeople in this organization that was being acquired were probably top tier. They were so educated, so trained. I forget the exact number of weeks, but each year it was somewhere between 10 and 15 weeks of training every year.
Wow.
Just to be like, the new technology and the new process and the new thing that it does, and maybe some reiteration, but that level of professionalism, it shined through because everybody in the organization was that professional. And it was just such a great feeling for the culture to get it right.
Sure, because what they've done is they've set the bar and they've trained to that bar, and then people will probably that extra attention and not being the typical. Unfortunately, a lot of salespeople are just like treated as, okay, here's a phone, here's our CRM, go have fun and let us know how it works out.
Make 100 calls and let me know when you're done.
Yeah, exactly. And how many, what did you sell? They look at the easy metric is how much business did they bring in and what's the dollar value. But anybody who knows a proper sales cycle knows that, well, that's at the end of the cycle. What are you doing, in between? And, do they understand those numbers and what that takes in your industry? I've worked in some industries that because of the pricing of goods and services that they get from other people, when they give out a quote, it's only good for like 2 days or 3 days because it's a more volatile pricing model, and if your salesperson doesn't know that, because I've seen it happen, they give the old price and it's like, well, but it's gone up by 10% and now we're actually losing money on this. Or another thing I've seen a lot is because of the lack of training and expectations and understanding how things get priced out, how to determine the what to quote a customer. To get the sale, the salesperson reduces the margin. So, service-based businesses typically have between the 20 to 50% margin built in, depending on how much is service. And something like installation, you've got products there, so there's a cost of goods sold. But if they reduce that margin and you're paying a commission on that, what is left after the sale, after the commission for the company? So now you get this squeeze on your net profit that is unsustainable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. And you talk about cost of goods sold and my ears perk up because that's my language. So, when I think about a service-based business, I almost immediately have their business model on their finances in my head. There's, cost of goods sold for the product, cost of goods sold for the labor. Okay, yep. So that's interesting that your brain goes in the same direction. All right, so we spent some time talking about these 3 different issues in this business, right? There's an issue with maybe kind of clarifying this role and really understanding what the KPIs are going to be and the expectations and all that. We also talked about their recruitment process and how perhaps there's a lack of consistency between what was talked about in the beginning and then like how it actually goes. And then they don't even have a process. And the third one was really on the onboarding side of it, right? It was, well, is there any ongoing training? Is there, how does that knowledge transfer happen? And so that's really interesting. There's definitely some cautionary tales there for business owners to not deviate from that plan. In our third episode, Andrea, I'm really excited because we get to talk about what do we do now? How do we fix this thing? Where are we headed? What kind of strategies are we going to talk about? And so, if you're listening to this episode, I really hope that you tune into the third one, because that's when Andrea gets to be, the solution person. We get to come in and talk about what do we actually do here? And how are we going to solve some of these problems? So I hope you stay tuned.
Thank you.